Today's episode is brought to you by Special, the independent streaming service connecting creators and viewers authentically and on demand. Stream independent. For more information, go to special.tv.
The Director Series is made possible by the support of our subscribers on Special. Subscribe today at special.tv/The Director Series and gain access to exclusive full-length Director Series episodes and other bonus content, ad-free. Sometime after the runaway success of Django Unchained, Tarantino was taking in a viewing of John Carpenter's horror classic, The Thing. He came away from this particular screening with complicated feelings, an impression that compelled him to take to his writing as a way to process his reaction. This new project also pulled from his deep affection for the televised Western serials of the 1960s, shows like Bonanza, The Virginian, and High Chaparral that routinely employed so-called bottle episodes, featuring powder keg drama in small, contained spaces. Tarantino initially thought his writings would lead to a new adventure for Django Unchained's titular hero, going so far as to give it the working title Django and White Hell. Beginning as a novel before morphing into the familiar screenplay format, Django and White Hell eventually revealed itself as having nothing to do with the eponymous character at all, at which point Tarantino reimagined it as a standalone piece. This early draft, with the new title The Hateful Eight, would pose a fascinating premise. What would happen if a roomful of bona fide Western villains were locked up together during a brutal snowstorm? What kind of gleeful carnage would ensue? The script made its way to trusted Tarantino collaborators like Michael Madsen, Tim Roth, and Bruce Dern, but somewhere along the way, perhaps inevitably, it leaked. Any writer would despair at an early draft of work getting away into the public sphere, but Tarantino was so despondent over his fans' feverish consumption of the leaked pages that he announced he wouldn't make the project after all. Fate would ultimately intervene, in the form of a live reading organized by LACMA and Film Independent and performed at the Ace Hotel Theater by a collection of A-list actors and frequent collaborators, many of whom would go on to star in the finished film. The reception from this event finally persuaded Tarantino to go ahead with The Hateful Eight as his eighth feature. Shot entirely on a 99-acre ranch in southwestern Colorado outside Telluride, so as to take advantage of a competitive $5 million in tax rebates against a $45 million budget, The Rock. A perennial Tarantino repertory player since Pulp Fiction, Samuel L. Jackson is finally given top billing for his performance as Major Marquis Warren, a taunting, tempestuous bounty hunter whose journey to Red Rock is cut short when he's stranded by the storm. He hitches a ride to Minnie's with an old acquaintance and fellow bounty hunter John Ruth the Hangman, played by Kurt Russell in his second collaboration with Tarantino after 2007's Death Proof. Hangman. Fresh off the heat from his acclaimed turn in Alexander Payne's Nebraska, Bruce Dern gets to spend the entire shoot reclining in a cushy chair as a cranky Confederate general named Sandy Smithers. Initially a happenstance visitor at the Haberdashery, Smithers' personal history is found to be intermingled with the other guests in surprising fashion, but none more so than his intimate connection to Major Warren, the man who murdered his son. Also seemingly there by total coincidence, Roth, Madsen, and Bashir's characters are revealed to be members of Domergue's gang. Roth being the well-dressed executioner with a British accent, Oswaldo Mowbray, Madsen being a gruff and reclusive cowboy named Joe Gage, and Bashir being the affable ranch hand Mexican Bob. After a minor supporting turn in Django Unchained, Goggins receives an increase in screen time as the hayseed sheriff-elect of Red Rock, Chris Mannix. His folksy drawl helps sell his background as a Confederate rebel, an affiliation that initially aligns him with Dern's General Smithers, before forging an unlikely alliance with the person who, by all accounts, should be his mortal enemy, Major Warren. Tarantino's cast is slightly larger than the 8 advertised on the marquee, incorporating James Parks, son of another Tarantino regular Michael Parks, as an irritable car driver named O.B., Death Proof's Zoe Bell as a bubbly frontier Kiwi named Six Horse Judy, and Channing Tatum as the rakish Francophile bandit and Daisy's brother Jody, amongst others. Tarantino engineers his film entirely around the interactions of these characters, strategically employing surprise revelations and backstabbing double crosses to ratchet up the tension until it explodes in grandiose, bloody fashion. Tarantino initially broke out on the strength of his unique voice as a screenwriter, a voice that fueled a highly identifiable energy and visual style. As his voice has matured, his aesthetic has mellowed out, relying less on kitsch and pop flash and more on beautiful, technically accomplished cinematography. This shift began in earnest with Inglourious Basterds, and continues with The Hateful Eight by retaining his regular cinematographer Robert Richardson. The affected retro vibe of his earlier work feels uniquely organic here, owing to the fact that Tarantino and Richardson shot the film in the Ultra Panavision 70mm format, the first film to do so in 50 years. The decision to utilize an otherwise extinct format subsequently informed every technical decision down the line. Shooting on 65mm film stock that would later be projected in 70, The Hateful Eight boasts an ultra-wide 276:1 aspect ratio, the widest around. Tarantino's compositions and camera movement are tailored accordingly, framed into a wider panorama to compensate for the snow-capped vistas that tower in the distance behind Minnie's haberdashery. Majestic crane and dolly movements appropriately evoke the sweeping scope of Western's past, while also enabling modern stylistic conceits like split-focus diopter compositions, slow-motion bullets that hit home with the sonic force of bombs, and Tarantino's own signature low-angle POV shots. Tarantino's old-school approach would extend to the film's post-production. While 35mm prints for the shorter theatrical version were struck from a digital intermediate, Tarantino specifically avoided the DI suite when it came time to grade the 70mm roadshow version, which means that the cold blue exteriors, warm amber interiors, and the rich hues of the period costumes are the result of old-fashioned photochemical color timing. The Hateful Eight also marks Tarantino's second consecutive collaboration with editor Fred Raskin, who stepped in to replace Tarantino's longtime collaborator Sally Menke after her unexpected death in 2010. Raskin proves an invaluable ally in helping Tarantino achieve the unique retro flavor of the bygone roadshow presentation format. A staple of mid-century American cinema, the roadshow is a term typically ascribed to 3-hour-plus epics that adopted a presentation style not unlike stage performance, complete with printed programs, an orchestral overture, and intermission. Whether due to dwindling audience attention spans or a desire to cram more screenings into a single evening, the roadshow has long fallen out of fashion. The last high-profile roadshow presentation was relatively recent for Steven Soderbergh's Che, a sprawling 4-hour portrait of the eponymous revolutionary fighter, but even then, it was regarded as a once-in-a-lifetime anomaly. The 187-minute 70mm roadshow presentation, containing an overture, intermission, alternate footage, and 6 minutes of extra footage over its shorter 35mm sibling, is Tarantino's preferred version of The Hateful Eight, yet it's also the least seen. Tarantino and his producers, Stacey Sher, Shannon McIntosh, Richard N. Gladstein, and the Weinsteins we do not speak of, knew that the considerable cost, reportedly $8 to $10 million, to retrofit enough theaters with analog 70mm projectors capable of handling over 250 pounds worth of film reels, was going to be an extremely limiting factor in distributing Tarantino's intended vision. Instead of simply giving in to the realities of the market, however, they aggressively pushed to install the necessary equipment in 50 theaters around the world, while promoting the roadshow version as a special, must-see, limited engagement. The 35mm version saw a much wider circulation, and as of this writing is currently the only version of The Hateful Eight available on home video. However, Tarantino manages a nod to his preferred vision within the theatrical cut by using the occasion of his opening credits to allude to an informal overture via a long glacially paced shot that allows the music to take prominence. In 2019, a third version of the film would emerge, simply dubbed as an extended edition. Tarantino would mark the film's streaming debut on Netflix by rearranging his edit into 4 separate episodes. An admittedly curious creative decision, to be sure, but one that further reinforces the literary affectations he regularly imposes on his work. In addition to The Hateful Eight's considerable technical curiosities, the film also marks Tarantino's first time using a wholly original score, courtesy of legendary spaghetti western composer Ennio Morricone. A longtime idol of Tarantino's, Morricone had lent some pre-recorded cues to the director for use in Kill Bill, Inglourious Basterds, and Django Unchained, only to publicly express his displeasure at how his music was handled and vow to never work with a provocative auteur again. Morricone obviously changed his mind somewhere along the way, as The Hateful Eight boasts a suite of new cues that would land the venerated composer his first ever Academy Award. Combining a grandiose, lumbering sound with a few of his unused cues from The Thing, Morricone's score benefits from the total creative freedom afforded him by Tarantino. This being a Tarantino film, however, The Hateful Eight would be remiss not to include a few choice, anachronistic needle drops. Towards this end, Tarantino incorporates an inspired mix of tracks from the likes of Jack White and Roy Orbison, and even throws in a poignant piano rendition of Silent Night to hammer home the film's Christmas-time setting. There are few voices in cinema as distinct as Tarantino's, each of his films proudly bearing his unique stamp. The Hateful Eight is undoubtedly a piece with Tarantino's efforts to expand his interconnected cinematic universe, while simultaneously drawing it closer together. Case in point, Roth's character is actually an ancestor of Michael Fassbender's Lieutenant Archie Hickox from Inglourious Basterds, or Madsen referencing the same film by musing that,
"A bastard's work is never done."
like his previous films, The Hateful Eight is structured in his signature format. Self-contained sequences that are partitioned off into book-style chapter intertitles, yet presented in a non-linear fashion as a means to bring further illumination and context to previous events. Within the story itself, his characters are gifted with an almost metatextual awareness about the greater universe around them. They seem to know they are inside a Tarantino film, readily breaking the fourth wall as if acknowledging their shared creator. Indeed, Tarantino is often a character in his own films, deploying himself into a range of capacities from full-fledged characters to cameos, and even as an omniscient narrator, as he does in The Hateful Eight during the feverish Domergue's Got a Secret sequence.
That's why this chapter is called Domergue's Got a Secret.
The characters within The Hateful Eight, like Tarantino's other iconic creations dating all the way back to Reservoir Dogs, all possess a sharp wit, a profanely florid speaking prose, and a gleeful eagerness for borderline sadistic violence against their fellow man. Tarantino has always worn his B-movie influences on his sleeve, and the trajectory of his career has seemingly organized his favorite genres into distinct eras. His love for 70s crime and heist films is evident throughout Reservoir Dogs, while his passion for blaxploitation pictures from the same era fundamentally inform Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown. Schlocky, kung fu, and bloody grindhouse flicks merged with westerns to create a distinct hybrid of styles that gave us Kill Bill and Death Proof. Starting with Inglourious Basterds, however, a very curious thing is unfolding. The western genre continues to inform Tarantino's storytelling, but rather than simply homaging that particular period, he is actively deconstructing them to understand the engine that fuels them. Inglourious Basterds, Django Unchained, and now The Hateful Eight come together to form a string of revisionist revenge westerns that directly confront America's ugly racial history. Tarantino's long-time, almost casual use of racial and sexist epithets in his work has earned him several enemies, in addition to a reputation as a deeply divisive and controversial voice. A truly equal opportunity offender, he has never shied away from carpet-bombing his narratives with some of the most egregious profanity known to man. However, it's hard to argue that Tarantino lacks empathy for his minority characters. They are frequently empowered to take up arms in their own defense or to right the wrongs of their persecution, and nowhere is this more evident in his last three features. Inglourious Basterds reveled in depicting a coalition of American soldiers hunting Nazi scalps to avenge their Jewish brethren. Django Unchained showed a slave rising up to annihilate his white masters without losing his own humanity in the process. Another aspect of this period in Tarantino's career has been the huge critical and financial success of his work. After a long award circuit dry spell, Inglourious Basterds marked Tarantino's return to the Oscars shortlist, a return he cemented with the even larger success of Django Unchained and its subsequent win for Best Original Screenplay. The Hateful Eight was similarly praised, earning mostly positive reviews that noted his continued excellence in both writing and direction. The film grossed $155 million against his $44 million budget, a notable downturn in the recent trend, but far from his worst showing. Well-earned Oscar nominations for Jennifer Jason Leigh's performance and Robert Richardson's cinematography followed suit, calcifying The Hateful Eight's reputation as an excellent addition to Tarantino's canon.